14-year-old boy walks out his front door on a cold December morning, heading to his last day of school before Christmas break. His mother watches from the window as he crosses the street in his red jacket. She has no idea this will be the last time she ever sees her son alive. What happens next will puzzle investigators for weeks and shock an entire community to its core. The morning of December 20th, 2019, started like any other day in the quiet town of Port Clinton, Ohio. But for the Dilly family, it would become the beginning of their worst nightmare. Harley Dilly was not your typical teenager. At 14 years old, he stood just 4 feet 9 inches tall and weighed only 100 pounds. Despite his small size, he had a big personality and loved playing video games. However, Harley faced daily challenges that many kids his age didn't understand. He had been diagnosed with high-functioning autism and something called oppositional defiant disorder, which made it hard for him to follow rules and get along with authority figures. The relationship between Harley and his parents had become strained in recent weeks. Arguments were becoming more common, and the latest fight was about a broken cell phone that his parents refused to replace. Money was tight in the Dilly household, and replacing electronics wasn't always possible. This made Harley angry and frustrated. On that Friday morning, Harley had asked his mother if he could stay home from school. It was the last day before winter break, and he knew they probably wouldn't do much real work anyway. His mother said no. She told him he needed to go to school like every other day. Harley was upset, but he put on his red puffer jacket and gray sweatpants and left the house around 7 a.m. What his mother didn't know was that Harley had made a different decision. Instead of walking to Port Clinton High School, he was planning to hide somewhere until his mother left for work. Then he could sneak back home and spend the day playing his beloved video games. The last image of Harley alive was captured on a neighbor's security camera. The footage shows a small figure in a red jacket crossing the street in front of his house. He looks like any other student walking to school on a winter morning. No one watching that video could have imagined the terrible fate that awaited this young boy. When Harley didn't come home Friday evening, his mother wasn't immediately worried. Their recent arguments had led to Harley running away before, usually to a friend's house. He would typically cool off overnight and return the next morning, hungry and ready to apologize. This pattern had happened several times before. But Saturday morning came and went. No Harley. Saturday afternoon passed. Still no sign of him. As Saturday evening approached, the Dilly family realized this time was different. Harley had never stayed away this long before. At nearly midnight on Saturday, December 21st, they finally called the Port Clinton Police Department to report their son missing. Police officer took the report seriously, but the timing raised some questions. Why had the family waited over 40 hours to report their child missing? The parents explained about Harley's previous runaways and their belief that he would return on his own. They described his behavioral challenges and the recent arguments about the cell phone. Port Clinton is a small lakeside town with a population of just over 6,000 people. Everyone knows everyone else's business. When word spread that Harley Dilly was missing, the entire community sprang into action. Police Chief Robert Hickman immediately organized search teams. They checked with all of Harley's friends, classmates, and extended family members. They searched local parks, abandoned buildings, and wooded areas. But there was one major problem. Despite all their efforts, no one had seen or heard from Harley since Friday morning. Not a single person could provide any information about where he might have gone. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. The timing couldn't have been worse. Christmas was just days away, and the police department was running with limited staff. But Chief Hickman was determined to find this missing boy. He called in help from multiple agencies, including the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, the U.S. Marshal Service, the State Highway Patrol, the FBI, and the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. Days turned into weeks. The search expanded to cover over 150 acres of land around Port Clinton. Volunteers joined law enforcement officers in combing through every possible hiding spot. They used search dogs, helicopters, and even underwater teams to search Lake Erie. The community held prayer vigils and raised money for search efforts. But still, nothing. No clues, no sightings, no evidence of where Harley might be. As the investigation continued, whispers began to spread through the small town. Some people started questioning the parents' story. Why had they waited so long to call police? Had they done something to their own son? The suspicion was painful for the Dilly family, who were already suffering from their child's disappearance.
I love you, Harley. Please come home. Please,
Investigators thoroughly examined every possibility. They looked into whether Harley had been kidnapped. They investigated whether he had run away to a different city. They even considered whether his parents might have harmed him. But every theory led to dead ends. There was simply no evidence to support any of these ideas. 3 weeks passed. Then 4 weeks. The case was growing cold, and investigators were running out of leads. Chief Hickman made a difficult decision. They would start the investigation over from the very beginning. Maybe they had missed something important. Chief Hickman partnered with a fresh investigator from the Bureau of Criminal Investigation named Lori Braunschweiger. Since she was new to the case, she wanted to examine everything with fresh eyes. They decided to retrace Harley's last known steps, starting from his house and following the exact path shown in the surveillance video. The video showed Harley crossing the street toward an empty house directly across from his family's home. This house had been searched before, but only from the outside. Police had looked through the windows and walked around the property, but the doors were locked and everything appeared undisturbed. This time, they decided to go inside. The house belonged to someone who lived out of town and was undergoing renovations. It had been empty for months. The owner gave police permission to search inside and provided them with a key. When Chief Hickman and investigator Braunschweiger entered the house, they expected to find nothing, just like all their previous searches. The inside of the house was dusty and quiet. Construction materials were scattered around, and plastic sheeting covered some areas. At first glance, everything looked exactly as it should in an empty, abandoned home. There were no signs that anyone had been living there or hiding there. But then they made a shocking discovery. On the floor of one room, they found a red puffer jacket. It looked exactly like the one Harley had been wearing in the surveillance video. Their hearts began racing. How had they missed this before? They looked closer and found more items. A hoodie, a t-shirt, and a pair of glasses. All of these belonged to Harley Dilly. But where was Harley himself? The investigators called for a full forensic team to process the scene. They carefully examined every inch of the house, looking for any clue about what had happened to the missing boy. As they worked, one of the investigators noticed something strange about a vent opening in the wall. The cover had been removed and was lying on the floor nearby. Curious, the investigator reached his hand into the vent hole to see if there was anything inside. What he felt next would haunt him forever. His fingers touched human hair. Someone was inside the wall. The horrible truth began to reveal itself. Harley Dilly was trapped inside the chimney of this empty house. He had been there the entire time, just yards away from his own home, while hundreds of people searched for him across the county. The rescue became a recovery mission. A specialized team was called in to carefully remove sections of the wall around the chimney. What they found inside broke the hearts of everyone involved in the search. Harley was found in a narrow brick shaft that measured only 13 inches by 9 inches, barely larger than a sheet of paper. He was positioned with his arms above his head, slightly slumped, wearing only his underwear. His pants, shoes, socks, and flashlight were found at the bottom of the shaft around him. Investigators were able to piece together what had happened on that fateful Friday morning. Instead of going to school, Harley had decided to explore the empty house across the street. All the doors were locked, but he noticed an antenna tower on the side of the building. He climbed up this tower to reach the roof. Once on the roof, Harley saw the chimney opening. With his small flashlight, he peered down into the dark shaft. It appeared to go straight down to what he thought was a fireplace inside the house. To his teenage mind, this seemed like the perfect way to get inside the locked building. What Harley didn't know was that this wasn't a traditional fireplace chimney. It was actually a narrow ventilation shaft for wood-burning stoves. There was no fireplace at the bottom, just a dead end in a brick-lined tunnel. Harley entered the chimney feet first with his arms raised above his head. The shaft was so narrow that once he started sliding down, there was no way to turn around or climb back up. The brick walls provided nothing to grip onto. He slid down approximately 15 feet until he reached the bottom. When he arrived at the bottom, Harley discovered the terrible truth. There was no way out. The bottom of the shaft was sealed, and the only exit was 15 feet straight up through the narrow opening he had just fallen through. Panic must have set in immediately. Harley found himself trapped in a space so narrow he couldn't bend his arms or legs properly. His jacket and shirt had bunched up around his head and shoulders as he slid down, making it even harder to breathe. Somehow, he managed to remove his jacket, hoodie, and shirt, pushing them out through small vent holes about 6 feet above him. He also managed to remove his shoes, socks, and pants, probably trying to make himself as small as possible to find a way out. The vent holes he had found gave him a small amount of fresh air, but the space was still incredibly cramped. The Ottawa County coroner later determined that Harley died from compressive asphyxia, likely on the same day he became trapped. This means he was unable to expand his chest fully to breathe properly. In such a narrow space, each breath became more difficult than the last. His oxygen levels would have slowly decreased as his body used up the limited air available. The most heartbreaking aspect of this tragedy is how close Harley was to help the entire time. He was trapped just across the street from his own home. His family was sleeping, eating, and going about their daily lives, not knowing their son was dying just yards away. For 23 days, while hundreds of people searched lakes, forests, and distant towns, Harley remained in that chimney. The house had been checked early in the investigation, but only from the outside. Even experienced investigators later questioned themselves, wondering, what did we miss? The discovery devastated the entire Port Clinton community. Chief Hickman, who had led the massive search effort, struggled with the outcome for months afterward. Parents across the town held their children a little tighter, realizing how quickly a simple mistake could turn into an unthinkable tragedy. Harley's death was ruled accidental. There was no evidence of foul play, no signs that anyone else was involved. It was simply a curious teenager making what seemed like an adventurous decision that turned fatal. The investigation revealed that Harley had probably thought he was being clever, finding a secret way into the locked house. The narrow chimney shaft that trapped Harley was designed for ventilation, not human passage. Even for someone as small as Harley, squeezing through the opening required significant effort. Once inside, the physics of the situation made escape impossible. The walls were too smooth to climb, the space too narrow to maneuver, and the distance too great to jump back up. This case changed how search and rescue operations approach missing person cases in Ohio. The Ohio Attorney General's office later released detailed files about the investigation to help other law enforcement agencies learn from this experience. The report emphasized the importance of thoroughly searching all buildings in the immediate area where someone disappeared, even if they appear secure and undisturbed. The Harley Dilly case also highlighted the unique challenges faced by children with autism and behavioral disorders. These children may make decisions that seem illogical to adults, but make perfect sense to them in the moment. They might seek out quiet, isolated spaces when feeling overwhelmed or upset. Understanding these behavioral patterns can be crucial in search efforts. For the Dilly family, the discovery brought both closure and new grief. They finally knew what had happened to their son, but the knowledge of how he died was almost unbearable. The image of Harley trapped and alone in that dark, narrow space haunted everyone involved in the case. The community of Port Clinton came together to support the family during this impossible time. Memorial services were held, and counseling was provided for students and residents who had participated in the search efforts. Many people needed help processing the trauma of this unexpected ending. The investigation also revealed important details about the last few days of Harley's life. He had been struggling at school and at home. The arguments with his parents had been increasing, and he felt misunderstood and frustrated. On that Friday morning, his decision to skip school wasn't just about avoiding one day of classes. It was about taking control in a situation where he felt powerless. The empty house across the street had probably caught Harley's attention many times before. Children are naturally curious about abandoned buildings, and for a boy who felt restricted at home and school, the idea of having a secret hideout would have been very appealing. The antenna tower leading to the roof would have seemed like an exciting challenge rather than a dangerous risk. What makes this story even more tragic is how preventable it was. If Harley had simply waited a few more hours, his mother would have left for work and he could have returned home safely. If the house had been secured differently, or if the chimney had been properly capped, this accident never would have happened. If he had told even one person about his plan, they might have talked him out of it. The technical details of how Harley became trapped paint a picture of a situation that became impossible very quickly. The 13-inch by 9-inch opening at the top of the chimney was barely large enough for his small frame to fit through. Once he committed to going down feet first, gravity took over. The brick walls offered no handholds or footholds. The 15-foot drop happened faster than he probably expected. At the bottom, Harley would have immediately realized his mistake. The sealed bottom of the shaft meant there was no fireplace to climb out through. The vent holes he found about 6 feet up were too small for him to fit through, though they did provide some air circulation. His attempts to remove his clothing show that he was conscious and thinking clearly for at least some time after becoming trapped. The investigation revealed that Harley had brought a small flashlight with him, which was found at the bottom of the shaft. This suggests he had planned his adventure and tried to be prepared. He probably thought he was being smart and careful by bringing a light source. Medical experts explain that compressive asphyxia occurs when external pressure prevents normal breathing. In Harley's case, the narrow walls of the chimney created constant pressure on his chest and abdomen. Even though he could get some air through the vent holes, he couldn't expand his lungs fully. Over time, this limited oxygen intake would have caused his oxygen levels to drop dangerously low. The exact timeline of Harley's death remains unclear. Sources close to the investigation believe he likely died within 6 to 7 hours of becoming trapped, but there's no way to know for certain. He may have lived for just a few hours, or he might have survived longer before succumbing to the lack of oxygen. The discovery of Harley's body on January 13, 2020, ended one of the most extensive missing person searches in Ohio's recent history. Over those 23 days, thousands of volunteer hours were logged. Professional search teams covered hundreds of acres. The FBI brought in specialized equipment and expertise. Social media campaigns spread Harley's photo across the country. All of this massive effort, while his body lay undiscovered just 50 yards from his front door. The Port Clinton community still remembers Harley Dilly. His story serves as a reminder of how precious and fragile life can be. It shows how a single moment of teenage curiosity and rebellion can lead to consequences that no one could have predicted or prevented. The investigation files released by the Ohio Attorney General's office provide a detailed look at every aspect of the search and discovery. These documents serve as a learning tool for other law enforcement agencies and a permanent record of the extensive efforts made to find Harley. But perhaps most importantly, Harley's story reminds us to cherish every moment with our loved ones. Arguments about broken cell phones and skipped school days seem trivial when compared to the permanent loss of a child. The Dilly family would give anything to have one more argument with their son, one more chance to hug him and tell him they love him. Harley Dilly's story is not just about a missing person case or a tragic accident. It's about a family's love, a community's dedication, and the harsh reality that sometimes, despite everyone's best efforts, tragedies happen that no one can prevent or predict. His memory lives on in the hearts of everyone who searched for him and in the lessons learned from his untimely death. This heartbreaking story reminds us that life can change in an instant. Subscribe to our channel to watch more real, true incidents so you could get awareness. Comment about this incident and pray for Harley. Remember that behind every missing person case is a family desperately hoping for their loved one's safe return.